Hello everyone. Before we jump in, make sure to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. That way, YouTube knows to keep sharing more stories like this with you. Now, let's get started. I pulled into the Purdue plant late in the evening, the kind of place you don't really notice until you're right up on it. Big industrial buildings with their floodlights glaring out across the lot, the air thick with that kind of smell you get around poultry processing, wet feathers, dust, and a sharp tang of ammonia that hangs in your nose no matter how hard you try not to breathe it in. It was the kind of smell that made you wrinkle your face without even thinking about it. The whole place hummed with that low industrial drone, fans somewhere in the distance, machines clanking inside the buildings. I had just dropped my empty trailer, glad to be done with it, and pulled the bobtail over to where they had us parked near a small pond. At first glance, it almost looked peaceful, the water black under the yellowish glow of the parking lot lights, a thin mist rising from the surface like it was giving off its own breath into the night air. I thought it might make for a quiet place to rest, away from the constant shuffle of trailers and forklifts banging around. My pickup wasn't until the next morning, 12 hours away, so I had plenty of time to sit, relax, and try to get some rest in the bunk. I did my post-trip inspection like always, walking the perimeter of the truck, making sure nothing had rattled loose, checking the tires and lights. It was quiet except for the hum of those plant fans in the distance, and every now and then I could hear splashing or rustling near the pond. Probably fish or maybe frogs, I told myself. Nothing unusual. I climbed back up in the cab, locked the doors, and stretched out in the bunk. The cab creaked slightly as it cooled in the night air, metal and fiberglass shifting as if settling in, the way trucks always do when you've been driving all day, and they finally come to a stop. I adjusted the curtain and let myself start to drift, the faint glow from the plant lights leaking in through the edges. It must have been around 3 a.m. when I first heard it. A faint tapping on my passenger side door. Not loud, not frantic, just enough to cut through the haze of sleep and make my eyes snap open. My mind immediately jumped to another driver. Maybe someone needed help. Maybe someone wanted to talk about lumpers, a check, directions, anything. I pushed myself up, rubbed my eyes, and looked out through the passenger window. There was no one there. The lot was still, the floodlights stretching long shadows across the gravel and grass. The pond shimmered faintly under the haze, but I didn't see anyone. My heart thudded a little harder than it should have for something so simple, but it was 3 a.m, and my nerves were already thin from being half asleep. I sat there for a moment, staring, waiting, but nothing moved. No footsteps, no figures slipping away. Just quiet. I must be hearing things, I muttered to myself. I laid back down, pulling the blanket higher, letting my body relax again. And then it came again. This time it was on the driver's side. A sharp rap, the same rhythm as before, like knuckles on metal but lighter. My whole body jerked awake. I sat straight up, threw the curtain aside, and peered out the driver window. Again, nothing. Just gravel, the faint ripple of the pond, a few trees in the distance swaying in the breeze. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing straight up now. Something about hearing it on both sides set me on edge. I reached over, double-locked both doors, checked them again just to be sure, then cracked open the side hatches so I could hear better. If there was something or someone out there, I didn't want to be caught off guard again. The minutes ticked by slow, the inside of the cab heavy with silence except for the faint hum of the plant. I kept my eyes half open, waiting, listening. That was when I heard it, a faint splat, splat, splat. It was soft, deliberate, moving along the driver's side of the truck. My chest tightened. Footsteps. Someone walking alongside my cab, dragging something wet maybe, or stepping in puddles. The sound was too faint to be boots. Too uneven. I eased up slowly, trying to time it, ready to whip the curtain aside and catch whoever it was in the act. My hand reached for the tire thumper hanging by the seat, a solid wooden handle with a weight at the end, good enough for both tires and trouble. I waited, holding my breath. Then there was a heavy thud above me, on the roof of the cab. I froze. My mind ran wild. Someone had climbed up. Someone was on top of my truck. I tightened my grip on the tire thumper, every muscle in my body locked tight. The thud had weight behind it, real mass. I stared up at the ceiling as though I could see through it, tracking the faint creak and shuffle above me. Then, all at once, the weight shifted, and something slid down the windshield. A goose. The damn bird tumbled clumsily from the top of the cab and landed with a thump on my hood. My heart nearly leapt out of my chest as the thing straightened itself up, flapped its wings once, and then stood there like it owned the place. It turned its head and locked eyes with me through the glass, black beady stare fixed, neck stretched tall like it was daring me to do something about it. For a second, neither of us moved. Me gripping my tire thumper in the half-dark, the goose pacing on my hood like a guard on duty. And then I heard it again, tapping at the driver's side door. My pulse hammered. I whipped my head toward the sound, and through the side window I caught sight of another goose, this one pecking at the metal like it had found a game to pass the night. The tapping was sharp and hollow, just like what had woken me earlier. That was it. I had had enough. I threw the door open, the cold night air rushing in, and the goose on the ground flapped and honked, waddling off as fast as it could manage, wings half out like a drunk trying to balance. Its honk was loud and absurd, echoing across the pond like some kid hammering the horn on a bike. The goose on my head gave me one last look, tilted its head as if unimpressed, and then flapped up into the air, circling back toward the pond. I sat there in the doorway, breathing hard, tire thumper in hand, staring out across the water. That was when I noticed them. Dozens of them. Maybe more. The pond was full of geese. Dark shapes dotted the shore and the water, waddling, splashing, honking. Some of them were already making their way up toward the trucks, their long necks stretched out, curious, bold. I hadn't realized it earlier, too focused on parking and getting some rest, but I had parked right next to their playground. The rest of the night was hell. Every couple of minutes there'd be another tap at the door, or a thud on the cab as one of them landed from the roof. Sometimes I'd hear the scraping of their webbed feet along the hood, or the rustle of wings as they flapped against the side mirrors. The noise never stopped long enough for me to really fall back asleep. Every time I closed my eyes, another sharp peck or a muffled thump snapped them open again. By 4 a.m, I gave up on sleep entirely. I sat upright in the driver's seat, staring out into the dark lot, watching them move around like shadows, the pond alive with ripples and splashes. My cab was surrounded by curious geese, their honks echoing off the plant walls, the sound carrying far across the otherwise empty night. It was ridiculous, but there was something unsettling about it all the same. The way they stared, unblinking. The way they moved together without reason, one starting up a racket and the rest answering like it was some private language. The way they seemed to have no fear of me at all. When the sun finally began to rise, a pale gray light spilling across the lot, they thinned out, drifting back toward the water. A few lingered, waddling slowly across the gravel, but most of them returned to the pond as if the night's fun was over. My cab was spattered with droppings, streaks across the hood and windshield, feathers stuck in the wipers. I stepped out finally, stiff and bleary-eyed, the air damp and cold. The pond looked ordinary again, just a piece of water behind the plant, nothing remarkable about it at all. But the memory of the night clung tight. Every sound, every tap, every thud. I didn't get a wink of real sleep, and the next 12-hour shift was one of the longest I'd ever pulled. But the image stayed with me, the beady stare of that first goose on my hood, standing tall in the floodlight glow, watching me like it knew exactly what it was doing. I never parked by that pond again. I had been driving long haul for years, so being alone on the road never bothered me much. In fact, I preferred it most of the time. Just me, the hum of the engine, and miles of highway stretching out in front of me. But there are certain nights out there that stick with you, and this one has stayed burned into my head more than most. I was hauling up from Tucson, Arizona, into Salt Lake City, Utah. The trip itself wasn't unusual. I'd done similar runs plenty of times. But this particular trip was a couple of years back, during that stretch when the main highway through part of Utah had been shut down because of flood damage. They'd had one of those freak flash floods that ripped right through the area, and entire sections of pavement were washed away. Construction crews had been working on it, but it meant drivers like me had to take detours through back roads and mountain passes that we weren't exactly familiar with. That night, I'd been running for hours. The detour had eaten up extra time, and by the time I was winding through the mountains of lower Utah, it was getting late enough that fatigue was setting in. I knew I couldn't push it much longer. The thing about fatigue on the road is it sneaks up on you. One minute you're fine, sipping coffee and tapping the wheel along with the radio, and the next your eyes are heavy, and you're blinking longer than you realize. You start to catch yourself drifting, and that's when you know it's time to pull over before you make a mistake. I found a wide shoulder along a stretch of road that cut through a canyon-like area. No streetlights, no houses, nothing. Just rock, brush, and empty sky. The closest town I remembered passing was nearly 40 miles behind me, and up ahead I knew it was just more emptiness until you got near civilization again. It was the kind of dark you only get in the middle of nowhere. Once you shut your headlights off, it feels like the world just vanishes outside your windows. No glow from a town in the distance, no neon signs, nothing. Just black. I eased my rig onto the shoulder, set my brakes, did a quick check to make sure I wasn't in a dangerous spot, and climbed back into the sleeper. The silence was immediate. Out there, you don't hear traffic rushing past, you don't hear voices, you don't hear anything except the occasional creak of the truck settling, or maybe a breeze moving through the brush. I stretched out on my bunk and let myself drift off. It must have been a couple of hours later, somewhere around 4 a.m, when I woke up. At first, I didn't know why. I was still groggy, and I lay there listening, trying to figure out what had stirred me. Then I realized I was hearing something on the outside of my cab. It was faint at first, like somebody was messing with the air hoses and power cables that connect from the back of the cab to the trailer. Those lines run right behind the cab wall, and in the sleeper, my head was only about 6 inches from them. When something touches them, you can hear it clearly through the wall. At first, I thought maybe the wind was pushing them, but there was no wind. Then it sounded more deliberate, like fingers tapping or tugging on the rubber and metal, like someone trying to figure them out. My heart rate went up immediately. Out there in the middle of nowhere, you don't expect anything to be messing with your truck. I held my breath, listening. Then the whole rig shifted slightly with weight. Something was climbing onto the landing plate on the back of my truck. I felt the distinct shake of metal flexing under weight, and it wasn't small. I've been around long enough to guess weight from feel, and whatever it was had to be in the couple 100-pound range, maybe 200-300. Heavy enough that it moved the whole truck, but not so heavy that it was like another semi slamming into me. In that moment, my mind scrambled. Out in that part of Utah, it could have been a big mountain lion, maybe even a black bear that had wandered down from the higher ground. Both were rare, but not impossible. I pictured claws raking across my cables, teeth trying to tear into something, and I knew if it was an animal, I didn't want it breaking anything important back there. My pulse was thudding in my ears. The dark inside my cab suddenly felt even tighter, and I didn't want to move. But instinct told me I had to do something. I wasn't armed with me in the sleeper, and I wasn't about to throw the door open into whatever was out there. So I did the next best thing. I balled my fist and slammed it into the sleeper wall as hard as I could. One solid, heavy blow that echoed through the metal. The reaction was immediate, but it wasn't claws or a growl I heard. It was a scream. A man's scream. High, panicked, raw. Not just a startled yelp, but full-throated terror. I heard him tumble off the back, hit the gravel shoulder hard, and then the chaos broke out. Voices. Not one, not two, dozens. Yelling, shouting all around my truck. My blood turned cold. My mind flipped from animals to people instantly, and not just one or two lost hikers. This was a whole group. I scrambled up front and threw myself into the driver's seat. My fingers shook on the switch as I flicked on my lights, blasting the scene with halogen beams. And what I saw froze me in disbelief. It wasn't criminals, it wasn't drifters, it wasn't some cult out in the middle of nowhere. It was a squad of Army reservists, fully geared, rifles slung, rucksacks on their backs. A whole damn unit spread around my truck, blinking at me like I'd just dropped a bomb on their exercise. It took me a second to process, and then it clicked. They weren't random. They were out on a midnight ruck march, running some kind of capture and secure drill. One of them had climbed onto my truck thinking it was their target. They'd been told to secure an abandoned vehicle out here in the dark. The problem was their abandoned truck was supposed to be 3 miles further down the road. I was never part of their plan. The one who had screamed was still on the ground, scrambling to his feet. The others were laughing now, shaking their heads, realizing what had just happened. And me? I sat there gripping the wheel, every nerve in my body buzzing, realizing how close I had come to a whole different kind of situation. I climbed back down after a minute and explained. I told them I wasn't part of their drill, that I'd just been too tired to keep driving and had pulled over here. I told them about waking up to them messing with my cables and about hitting the wall to scare off what I thought was an animal. Some of them chuckled nervously, some looked embarrassed, and a few looked like they were going to have to answer to someone higher up. They got on their radio, called their commanding officer, and explained the mix-up. Orders came back quick. Leave me be, make sure none of the other squads tried to run their exercise on my rig, and move along. After that, They gathered themselves and started down the road again, their voices fading back into the night. I sat on my step, breathing in the cold desert air, staring out at the black horizon. My truck still rocked a little from where they'd been climbing around on it. I climbed back into my bunk eventually, but I didn't go back to sleep right away. My mind replayed it over and over, the cables rattling, the weight shifting onto my truck, the scream in the darkness, and then the swarm of voices. Out there in the pitch black, half asleep, I could have sworn I was seconds away from something terrible. But in the end, it wasn't animals, it wasn't killers, it wasn't anything supernatural. Just a squad of soldiers who had the wrong coordinates. A perfect storm of coincidence. When the sun finally rose, I fired up my truck, pulled back onto the empty road, and carried on north. The mountains stretched out ahead of me, pale and sharp in the morning light. Even now, whenever I drive that stretch of road, I remember that night. The feeling of being surrounded in the dark, the weight on my truck, the scream that shattered the silence. It was one of those moments where your brain goes to the darkest possibilities first, because you don't know the truth yet. And the truth, as strange as it was, turned out to be something I never would have guessed. That's the kind of thing the road gives you sometimes. You think you've seen it all, then one night you find yourself in the middle of nowhere, startling a squad of soldiers who thought you were part of their war game. And that, out of everything I've experienced out here, might be the creepiest and strangest moment of all. I used to run hotshot freight across the Great Plains and into Minnesota, North Dakota, and Montana. Those jobs taught me something about myself and about the roads out there, mostly that I could drive through just about anything if I had to, and that the plains are some of the loneliest, most unforgiving stretches of asphalt a person can set their tires on. There's a certain look to those roads that anyone who's been out there knows by heart. Long, straight black ribbon, cutting through land so flat you swear you could see the curve of the earth if you stared hard enough. Telephone poles standing like toothpicks against the horizon, all equally spaced, as though some careful giant had lined them up with a ruler. During the day, the fields stretch on forever, pale yellow or green depending on the season, broken only by a grain silo or an old barn slowly collapsing into itself. But at night, especially around 2 or 3 in the morning, everything changes. The land becomes a vast, empty sheet of blackness. The road feels more like a tunnel than anything else, even though there are no walls, just the cone of your headlights carving out a slice of the world ahead while everything else disappears. That night, I was hauling a tractor part westward. Some farm in Montana had broken down in the middle of harvest, and the part one was carrying was the difference between them finishing the season on time or losing who knows how many acres of crop. Hotshot jobs like that were stressful, but they also paid the bills, and I was proud of how often I came through for folks. I had been driving since late evening, and had passed through Fargo hours earlier, heading west on I-94. My plan was to make it across North Dakota before dawn, so I could be in Montana by morning. Around 2 in the morning, I felt it creeping in, that highway hypnosis that truckers talk about. The strange rhythm of driving those endless stretches of flat black road, the vibration in the steering wheel, the steady hum of tires against pavement, it lulls you. I had been through it plenty of times, and I knew what to expect. My eyes would want to glaze over, shapes on the road would start to blur, and every mile marker would look like the last. It's easy to get careless, but I'd been doing this long enough to keep it in check. I chewed on sunflower seeds, sipped coffee that had gone lukewarm hours ago, and cracked the window to let cold air slap me awake. That's when I noticed something ahead. At first, it looked like the shadow of something lying across my lane. From half a mile away, I figured it was just some tire tread, maybe a long strip of rubber left behind after a blowout. That wasn't unusual. Out there, you saw every kind of debris, wood tools, straps, even the occasional ladder someone forgot to tie down. Still, something about the shape nagged at me. It wasn't broken up or irregular like most debris. It was long, smooth, and stretched across the entire lane in one solid line. I slowed a little, keeping my eyes fixed on it. I figured I'd ease over into the opposite lane and give it a wide berth. With no traffic for miles in either direction, that was simple enough. But as I closed the distance, my stomach tightened. It wasn't rubber. It wasn't any kind of cargo. It was 2 people. They were lying head to toe, stretched out in perfect alignment, blocking the entire lane. One of them had their arms pressed to their sides, while the other looked sprawled out a bit more, but both were unmistakably human. My first instinct was panic. Had I just come across an accident? Had someone fallen out of a vehicle? Were they drunk and passed out? I swerved into the other lane, my headlights washing over their bodies as I passed. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my neck. I slowed almost to a stop a few hundred feet past them, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. I stared at them in the mirror, waiting for them to move. They didn't. Not even a twitch. I thought about backing up. My whole upbringing told me it would be wrong to just drive off if someone needed help. But something else gnawed at me. A memory surfaced, an old story that a graybeard driver once told me over coffee in a truck stop diner. He said that in certain remote stretches of highway, people would lay down in the road at night, pretending to be injured or unconscious. When a driver stopped to help, a group hiding in the brush or the ditch would rush out. They'd beat the driver, rob him, steal his vehicle, sometimes even leave him stripped down on the side of the road miles from any town. At the time, I chalked it up to truck stop horror stories, the kind old-timers liked to pass around to spook younger guys. But in that moment, watching those two motionless bodies under the pale wash of my taillights, the story felt real. Too real. My palms were slick with sweat. I cracked the window wider and listened. The night air poured in, empty, cold, and quiet. I expected to hear movement from the fields, maybe footsteps crunching in the gravel shoulder. Nothing. Just the low idle of my truck and the faint hiss of wind. I told myself if they were really hurt, they'd at least try to move when a truck barreled past inches from their bodies. But they hadn't. They had stayed still as stone. That wasn't right. No drunk, no injured person, no unconscious man would lie perfectly stiff like that through the roar of a diesel engine rushing by a few feet away. My foot hovered over the brake, but the longer I sat there, the more my instincts screamed at me not to stop. Every nerve in my body buzzed with the kind of unease you don't ignore. It's the same feeling you get when you walk down a dark alley and realize someone is following you. You don't wait to confirm it, you just move. So I shifted back into gear. My headlights stretched out ahead again, eating the road. As my truck rolled forward, I glanced one last time in the mirror. That's when I saw them move. Both figures sat up at the same time. No staggering, no slow, groggy movements like you'd expect from someone drunk or injured. Just a quick, deliberate motion, like they had been waiting for the signal. They turned toward the shoulder and started walking off the road. Not running. Walking. Calm, like they had all the time in the world. That sealed it for me. Whatever was happening back there wasn't my problem. I pressed harder on the accelerator, keeping my eyes forward, jaw locked tight. The urge to get as much distance between myself and that stretch of road was overwhelming. For the next hour, every shadow along the shoulder made my chest tighten. I imagined headlights appearing in my mirror, some beat-up truck loaded with the rest of their crew coming after me. I kept checking my mirrors compulsively, expecting taillights or movement, but the highway stayed empty. Just me, the white dashed lines ticking by, and the endless dark fields on either side. Eventually, I grabbed my CB and called it in, giving as clear a description of the location as I could manage. The dispatcher on the other end said they'd relay it to local law enforcement, but I could tell by her tone she knew as well as I did that it was unlikely anything would come of it. Out there, miles from the nearest town, it would take a long time for anyone to get to that spot. Whoever those people were, they'd be long gone by then. When the sun finally started bleeding across the horizon behind me, relief washed through me. The plains looked different in daylight. Less threatening, more open, almost comforting. But I couldn't shake the image of those two bodies lying across the road, still as corpses until I decided to keep going. And then, just like that, they were alive, sitting up and walking away. I made it to Montana, dropped off the tractor part, and collected my pay. The farmer shook my hand and thanked me like I'd saved his whole season. I smiled and nodded, but in the back of my head I kept thinking about how close I might have come to losing everything. My truck, my cargo, maybe even my life. That old graybeard story had sounded like folklore, a scare tactic to keep green drivers cautious. But now I knew better. It wasn't just a story. Out there, in the emptiness of the plains at 2 in the morning, it was real. And because I'd listened, I kept my truck, my job, and my teeth. Sometimes, when I'm driving through another lonely stretch in the middle of the night, I wonder how many drivers weren't so lucky. I still remember the first time I heard this story from my dad. He's been driving trucks between Edinburgh and London for most of my life, and he's full of tales from the road. Some are funny, some are boring, And some are the kind that stick with you because you can tell even he doesn't have the answers. This one, though, is the one he always came back to. He's told it so many times that I can picture it all in my own head like I was there in the passenger seat. He says it happened years ago, but the way he describes it, it's still fresh for him. He always says it was the only time in all his years on the motorway where he felt something was properly wrong, something he couldn't explain or brush off. He had left Edinburgh in the evening, later than he usually liked. He always preferred to leave early morning, catch the daylight hours, and get a good run down to London before fatigue set in. But this job was a tight schedule, and he had to pick up the load later in the day, so by the time he hit the motorway heading south it was already dark. That time of night, traffic thins out. You get stretches of road where it feels like you're the only person alive. Then, every so often, you'll have a cluster of cars, maybe another lorry or two, but it's never steady like daytime traffic. My dad always said those were the loneliest drives, the ones where the only thing you could hear was the hum of the tires and the constant rattle of whatever you were hauling in the back. He'd been on the road maybe an hour, maybe a little more. He said the sky was black and the air looked heavy with moisture, not quite raining but threatening it, the kind of weather where the road glows under the headlights and your windscreen wipers squeak now and then just to clear the mist. His radio was on, but low, mostly just to break up the silence. That's when he noticed the car on his right. It had come up alongside him, keeping pace. At first he thought nothing of it. Sometimes drivers sit alongside a lorry while they wait for a clear spot to overtake. But this one lingered, and when he looked over, he saw her. He always describes her the same way. A woman with her hair tied up tight in a bun, like Miss Trunchbull from Matilda. That was his reference every single time. He said he never forgot that detail because the bun was so harsh, so pulled back, it made her face look sharper, more exposed. And her expression, that was what hit him. She was staring at him with eyes wide open, her mouth tight, her whole face locked in a look of pure terror. Not like she was surprised, not like she was angry, just terrified. For a few seconds, my dad didn't know what to make of it. He looked back at the road, then glanced again, and she was still there, staring right at him, not blinking, not moving her lips, not doing anything but watching him like he was her last hope. Then the car drifted forward, pulled across the lane, and took the next exit off the motorway. Just like that, she was gone. He remembers gripping the wheel tighter, trying to shake off the chill that had crawled into his chest. He thought maybe he'd imagined the expression. Maybe she was just tired, maybe she'd had an argument with the driver, maybe it wasn't even fear, just the weird way headlights had lit her face. He tried to convince himself of that, because what else could he do? He wasn't about to chase them down and exit. He was on the job, he had miles to cover, and besides, what would he even say if he did? So he kept driving. The road stretched on. The hours ticked by in that slow way only night driving can drag. He said he couldn't shake the image, though. Every time he looked in his side mirrors, he half expected to see that bun of hair, that face staring back at him. Then about half an hour later, it happened again. A different car this time. He swears it was different make, different color, different driver. But as it came alongside him, he glanced to the side, and there she was. The same woman. Same hair, same face, same expression. Sitting in the passenger seat like she had been before, staring at him through the glass, her eyes wide, her body stiff, her terror so obvious it cut through the night. This time he felt his stomach drop. He knew it wasn't his imagination. He knew it wasn't just a trick of the light. She was there. Somehow, she was in another car, with another driver, doing the same thing as before. He didn't waste time thinking. He decided then that when he reached the next services, he'd pull in and call it in. Even if it was nothing, even if it turned out to be some strange coincidence, he couldn't just ignore it anymore. If there was any chance this woman was in danger, he needed to say something. But just as suddenly as before, the car sped ahead and disappeared into the distance before he could catch a plate number. He cursed under his breath, kept his eyes fixed on the road, and pushed on. The hours rolled by. Motorways at night blur together. Endless lanes of tarmac, reflective signs whipping past, the occasional flash of headlights. He tried to keep his mind on the drive, but the unease kept building. He'd never seen the same person in two different cars before. He'd never seen a face like that either, so locked in fear it felt like she was trying to burn the image into him, begging him to remember. It was nearly 4 hours later, close to the point where the lights of London started to glow faintly on the horizon, when it happened for the third time. He said he felt it before he even looked. The way the engine of the car hummed alongside him, the way the presence of another vehicle made itself known in the corner of his vision, it all felt heavier, loaded. He turned his head, and there she was again. Same woman. Same hair wound up tight. Same bun that looked like it was pulling her scalp back. Same face. But this time, it was worse. She wasn't just staring. She was screaming. Her mouth was wide open, her throat straining, her hands pressed against the window as if she was trying to claw her way through the glass. And even though he couldn't hear her through the roar of the motorway, he could see it. She was screaming at him. Not the driver, not anyone else, him. That was the breaking point. He yanked the wheel and pulled off into the nearest levee, his hands shaking as he tried to park straight. He grabbed his phone and called the police right there, his voice low and urgent as he described what had happened. They told him they'd already had 3 other calls about the same woman, the same description, all in the same area that night. He wasn't the only one who had seen her. That, in some ways, made it worse. It meant it wasn't just his tired eyes. It wasn't just him losing it on the road. She was real. Other people had seen her too. After that, there was nothing. The police took his report, but he never heard back. He checked the news for weeks afterward, waiting for a headline, waiting for a follow-up about a missing woman, a body found, an arrest, anything. But there was nothing. No name, no explanation, no trace. He says that's the part that haunts him the most. Not knowing. If it had turned out to be nothing, if he'd seen a story about a prank or a film being shot or some bizarre coincidence, he could have put it to bed. If it had been a tragedy, at least he would have known what he saw was real and that it meant something. But there was nothing. Just silence. He still thinks about her. The woman with the Miss Trunchbull bun. The woman who appeared in 3 different cars in the same night, each time more desperate, each time more terrifying. He thinks about her eyes, the way she stared, the way she screamed. He thinks about what could have been happening in those cars, who the drivers were, why she kept appearing to him of all people. He says he's seen a lot of strange things on the road, accidents, fights, people wandering where they shouldn't be, but nothing ever stuck with him the way she did. Because at least with those things, you get an ending. With her, there never was one. Just a string of sightings, a report to the police, and then nothing but the memory that he can't shake. And every time he tells the story, he ends it the same way. He says he hopes it was nothing. He hopes it was some giant coincidence, some mistake, some series of events that had nothing to do with him. But he knows, deep down, that it didn't feel like nothing. It felt deliberate. It felt like she was trying to tell him something he could never understand. That's why he still tells it. Because he doesn't want to forget her. Because maybe if he keeps telling it, someone else will know what it meant. And because the not knowing, that's the scariest part of all. I used to work as a road train driver in the Gascoyne region of outback Western Australia. If you don't know the place, it's dry country, red dirt stretching further than your eyes can handle. The sort of place that makes you feel small even when you're sitting high up behind the wheel of 3 trailers hooked together. Most of the runs were long, hot, and lonely, and night shift was always the hardest part. The nights out there felt endless. The sky didn't just get dark, it went black, proper black. The kind where you couldn't tell the horizon from the ground unless the moon decided to show itself. Driving through that sort of night, with nothing but your headlights carving out 2 narrow tunnels ahead of you, did strange things to your head. The black dog phenomenon was real. Fatigue worked on your brain like sandpaper, slowly stripping away your ability to judge what was in front of you. I'd swear I'd see things in the shadows, goats turning into beasts, branches that looked like someone crouched waiting, or a fence post that seemed to step across the road before it flickered back into what it really was. Sometimes the tricks of the light were so sharp you could almost believe them. One night I was absolutely certain a corgi darted across the road in front of me. A corgi. Out here. The odds of that were ridiculous, and I knew it, but I hit the brakes hard, heart pounding, trying not to take out a dog that shouldn't have even existed there. Of course, there was nothing when I rolled past, not even dust stirred up. Just my eyes and my mind conspiring against me. That's the sort of thing fatigue did. I learned to keep myself sharp, coffee, smokes, blasting music when the cab got too quiet. But even then there were limits. You could only fight biology so long. Some nights you had no choice but to pull over. This one night sticks with me. It had been a long haul, hours of straight road with not much more than the occasional kangaroo bounding across or goats gathering near the scrub. I remember feeling that heavy weight behind my eyes, the one that tells you you're a few minutes away from falling asleep at the wheel, whether you like it or not. I decided to stop. Out there, you don't always have proper truck bays, just flat stretches of dirt where you can get the trailers off the road. I found a spot, eased the road train over, and let the engine idle down until it was cold enough to shut off. I crawled into the bunk behind the seats, stretched out, and told myself I'd get a couple of hours before carrying on. The cab of a big truck is surprisingly comfortable when you've been driving all day, the hum of cooling metal and faint tick of the engine dying down settling into a rhythm. I closed my eyes, and before long I was out. When I woke, it wasn't gentle. Something snapped me awake. At first, I didn't know why, just that strange, sharp sense that the world outside had changed while I was asleep. It was dark, no moon coming through the window, but I could hear noises. Not voices, nothing like talking, but there was an order to the sound, like patterns repeating. It wasn't random, not just wind pushing through branches. My ears picked it up before my brain knew what to make of it. Then I noticed the cab shaking. Not a light sway like you'd get if a gust of wind pushed against the trailers. This was heavy, like something had a grip on the truck and was testing it. I froze on the bunk, every hair on my arm standing straight. Trucks this size don't move easily, not unless you've got a proper storm blowing. I hadn't felt anything like that when I stopped. I sat up and looked toward the mirrors. My eyes adjusted slowly, but I could see shadows moving around the truck. Not clean shapes, not enough detail to say man or animal, just dark forms shifting at the edge of the lightless night. I held my breath, straining to make sense of it. My mind flicked through possibilities, feral goats, maybe cattle wandering through. But the weight of the shaking didn't match. Even a mob of goats wouldn't move a cab this size in unison. I didn't waste long trying to figure it out. I reached forward, flicked the ignition, and the truck roared back to life. Every single light on the rig lit up, the headlights, the roof lamps, the work lights on the trailers, flooding the dirt around me in blinding beams. The shadows scattered, but whether they were goats, kangaroos, or just my eyes struggling to catch up, I can't say. I shoved the truck into gear, pressed hard on the accelerator, and hauled back onto the bitumen, leaving that spot behind as quick as I could manage without tipping a trailer. The road stretched out in front of me, black and empty. My heart was still hammering in my chest, hands tight on the wheel, every sense tuned sharp. I told myself it had to be wind, maybe some goats brushing against the trailers, maybe fatigue playing tricks again. Rational explanations were all I had, and I clung to them because the alternative was worse, sitting in that cab, thinking the outback night itself had reached out to touch me. I didn't stop again until I hit the port. By then the first light of dawn was breaking, soft pink and orange bleeding across the horizon, chasing away the black. The world looked normal again. Trucks lined up, men moving about, voices calling orders, the smell of diesel and dust filling the air. Nothing out of place, nothing strange. I finished my run, but I made a decision that morning. I never slept on night shift again. If I was tired, I'd push through to daylight no matter what it took. Coffee, music, open windows, whatever I had to do. Because lying in that cab, feeling it shake while the night pressed in, was something I couldn't face twice. I still think about it sometimes. I try to reason it out. Wind picking up, goats moving around, my brain half awake and half dreaming. That explanation fits, more or less. It doesn't sit perfectly, though. The cab shouldn't have rocked the way it did, not unless the wind was howling, and it hadn't been. But what choice do you have? You take the explanation that lets you keep working, keep driving, keep moving forward. Even so, the memory stays sharp. The feel of the cab shifting under me, the sound of those strange patterned noises outside, the glimpse of shadows moving where they shouldn't have been. Out there in the outback, in the dead of night, you learn quickly how small you are and how easy it is for the world to remind you. That was enough for me. From then on, I made sure the only place I slept was with the sun up and the road quiet. Whatever had been out there that night, or whatever my mind thought it saw, I wasn't giving it another chance. I was on my trash route that morning, same as always. It wasn't the middle of nowhere, but it was close enough. The kind of place where you can drive for miles and only see a handful of houses sitting on big lots, long gravel driveways stretching off the road, barns leaning into the wind, fields rolling out in every direction. It was quiet, too. The kind of quiet you only get in rural areas, where even the birds seem to keep their distance until you're standing still long enough for them to trust you. The truck rumbled under me, diesel engine grumbling low, and every bump in the road shook through the cab. My partner was on the back, hopping down at each stop, dragging cans to the lift, dumping them, shoving them back. I'd been doing this long enough that the rhythm of the job was automatic. You don't think much when you're on a trash route. You just drive, stop, wait, pull forward. Same thing over and over. We were at one of the usual stops, a farmhouse with 2 dented metal cans, when I noticed a pickup easing in behind us. It didn't pass, didn't honk, just stopped and sat there. I thought maybe it was someone waiting to get around, but then the driver's door opened. A woman got out. She was small, petite, maybe 5'2" at most. Dark hair pulled back quick like she hadn't cared what it looked like. She wore scrubs like the kind nurses or techs wear, except hers were stained. Not little spots, either. Big patches of dried and fresh blood, soaked through in places. It wasn't the kind of thing you miss. She walked up to me fast, like she had a purpose, but there was no panic in her face. No fear. Just steady eyes and a calm way about her that felt out of place considering the state of her clothes. She asked me for directions to Lake Jack Nolan. The name caught me off guard. That lake was at least 30 minutes from where we stood, down twisting back roads, barely marked. Not a spot you'd stumble on by accident. She said there was a deer that had been hit by a truck out on the road near the lake, and she had been sent to remove the remains. Her voice didn't shake, and she didn't seem embarrassed about the blood. She just said it like it was normal. But she never said who sent her. That part stuck with me, even as I pointed her down the way she needed to go. I gave the directions as best I could. Take the county road out, turn at the old mill, follow the signs. She nodded, thanked me, and walked back to her truck. That truck was nice. Too nice, really. A newer model, shiny paint, spotless except for some dirt on the tires. It didn't match the picture of someone who'd be sent out alone to haul off roadkill, especially not something the size of a deer. I watched her climb in, start it up, and drive off without hesitation, like she'd already been there before. I remember looking at my partner. We didn't say much, but the same thought was written all over both of us. She wasn't moving a deer anywhere at her size, not without help, not without equipment. And why was she already covered in blood before she even got there? If she'd just been called out, what had she been doing? We stood there a moment longer than usual, watching the dust from her tires settle back onto the road. Then we went back to work. That's what you do on a trash route. You keep moving. But the image stayed with me. The blood-soaked scrubs, the calm way she carried herself, the clean truck pulling away toward a lake that barely anyone went to. I kept thinking about how easy it would be to say you were cleaning up a deer when you were really dumping something else. Something no one was supposed to find. All day, every time we stopped, it came back to me. I tried to shake it off, tried to bury it under the routine. The clang of cans, the grind of the lift, the smell of garbage hanging heavy in the warm air. But it lingered. I thought about how she hadn't seemed lost. She'd stopped like she knew exactly where to ask, like we were part of the plan. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how wrong it all felt. When we finished the route, we clocked out and went home. The others talked about it, too, in little passing comments. Someone joked about her dumping a body instead of a deer, and we all laughed a little too hard, like laughter was the only way to make sense of it. But behind that laugh was something else. A quiet agreement that it wasn't just a joke. That night I couldn't get to sleep right away. I kept replaying the scene in my head. The way the blood had dried on her shirt, stiff and dark, but some of it still wet. The way her truck gleamed like it had just come off the lot, not a trace of dirt or wear on the paint. The way her hands didn't shake when she pointed at the road, asking if it was the way to the lake. I thought about how we'd just let her go. We gave her directions, watched her drive off, and that was it. We never asked questions, never pressed her. We never thought to write down her plate or look closer at what she had in the truck bed. We just let her disappear into the back roads, carrying blood on her clothes and a story that didn't add up. The lake she asked about doesn't see much traffic. It's quiet, tucked back off the main highway, with one gravel lot and a boat ramp that no one uses anymore. If she went there, no one would have noticed. Not that day, not the next, maybe not ever. And the truth is, I don't know what she was really doing. I'll never know. Maybe it was a deer, though I don't believe it. Maybe it was something else, something heavier than roadkill, something that needed to disappear into deep water or thick brush. What I do know is that her face never left my mind. Calm, steady, almost detached, like she'd already rehearsed it 100 times. Like this wasn't her first trip, like it wouldn't be her last. And every time I drive that route now, passing the spot where she stopped us, I look in the mirror without meaning to. I half expect to see that truck easing in behind me again, quiet and patient, waiting for me to notice. We went back to work that day like nothing happened, but the truth is something did. Something I can't name, something I can't explain. And it sits with me still years later, heavier than any load of trash I've ever hauled. Because sometimes, when you're out on those rural roads, you realize you've just brushed against someone else's secret, and you'll never know just how deep it goes. I used to do deliveries for a while. Not like an actual truck driver, but more like a guy running routes for the company I worked for. It was nothing fancy, just loading up the van, checking the list, and heading out. Most of the time it was simple, routine, and quiet. I liked it, in a way, because it gave me a lot of time alone, a lot of long stretches of road with no one to bother me. But sometimes that quiet has a way of turning on you. Sometimes it makes you notice the things you'd rather not notice, and sometimes it makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up when you least expect it. There was this one route I only had to do maybe once a month. It was one of the longest, and it took me out into the boondocks. When I say boondocks, I mean way out, 25 miles or more from anything I'd call civilization. It wasn't just outside of town, it was in that space between two larger towns where there wasn't much of anything except endless fields, patches of trees, and long stretches of broken pavement. No gas stations, no quick stops, no signs of people for miles on end. Just road. That kind of drive wears on you. Most routes, you'd see cars here and there, trucks passing by, farmers in their pickups, something. But that one stretch was always dead quiet. Still, on that route, I always remembered seeing at least one vehicle heading the other direction. Maybe a pickup or an old sedan, but something. It was almost like a strange reassurance, like proof that the road was alive, that I wasn't the only one crossing that lonely gap between towns. It never failed, except once. Along that route there was a cluster of old houses. For maybe 5 of them, scattered close enough together that you could tell they had once been some kind of community, but they looked like they had been left behind years ago. Roof shingles peeling, porches sagging, paint sun-bleached and flaking. Grass always overgrown. I never once, in 6 months of running that delivery, saw anyone out there. No cars parked outside. No movement. No signs of life. After a while I just assumed they were abandoned, left to rot out in the middle of nowhere. It fit the vibe. Honestly, it almost gave me a strange comfort. They were landmarks. You knew if you passed them, you were about halfway there. They broke up the monotony of the drive. Just sad little skeletons of homes. This one afternoon in the fall, though, I saw something different. It was late in the day, sometime after 2 or 3, I think. The sun was still up, but it was starting to lean toward that golden hour, where the light gets long and soft and shadows start stretching across the road. Leaves were turning, orange and red and yellow, scattering across the pavement with every gust. The air had that crisp bite to it. I'd already been driving for what felt like forever without seeing another car. Not one. The silence had started getting under my skin by then. I'd glance into the rearview mirror now and again, half expecting to see headlights way back in the distance, but it was always just empty road behind me. I kept telling myself it was fine, just one of those rare stretches where no one else was traveling. Still, my stomach was tight with unease. When the houses finally came into view, I felt that usual relief. A mark, a sign I was making progress. Only this time, as I came closer, I noticed movement. At first it didn't register. My brain had written that place off as dead long ago, so it took me a second to realize there was someone in one of the yards. An old woman. She was pushing one of those manual grass cutters, the kind with the spinning blades that only move when you push. It struck me as odd immediately. The yard she was in didn't look like it had been maintained in years. The grass was patchy, uneven, mixed with weeds. The porch behind her looked ready to collapse. But she was out there, moving slowly, pushing that cutter in a crooked line across the patch of yard. For a split second, I felt almost relieved. Maybe someone did live out there after all. Maybe I'd been wrong about those houses. But that thought didn't last long, because as I got closer, she stopped. Just froze in place, like she had been caught doing something she shouldn't. The cutter's handle tilted forward in her hands. She didn't keep working. She didn't look at her lawn. She looked right at me. I eased up on the gas, not really sure why. Maybe I thought I was going too fast. Maybe I thought she wanted me to slow down. But the closer I got, the more wrong it felt. There was something about the way she stared. I can't explain it perfectly. It wasn't shock, and it wasn't curiosity. It was locked on me hard, like she was waiting for something. Like she had been waiting for me. My chest tightened up. My hands went clammy on the wheel. I drove past her, trying not to stare. But I couldn't help it. I flicked my eyes to the rearview mirror as soon as I cleared the house. That's when my stomach dropped. She wasn't looking at her lawn anymore. She wasn't even holding the cutter upright. She had let it fall sideways, and her whole body had turned to face me. She was standing there, staring straight at my van as it rolled further down the road, her head following me. No movement, no wave, just a fixed stare. I had the road to myself, but I pressed the gas a little harder than before. My skin prickled all over like I'd just brushed against something electric. I couldn't shake it the rest of the way. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see a car pulling out behind me, or worse, her still standing in the road even though I had left her a good half-mile back. Of course, there was nothing. Just that long empty stretch. By the time I made my delivery, I was still thinking about it. My customer didn't notice anything off about me, but my hands were shaky when I signed the slip. On the way back, I tried not to look too hard when I came up on those houses again. This time the yard was empty. No one there. The cutter wasn't even out. The place looked the way it always had, deserted, collapsing, dead. If I hadn't seen her with my own eyes earlier, I would have sworn I imagined it. But I know I didn't. I know what I saw. That was the only time I ever saw anyone out there. In the 10 months I kept doing that route afterward, through fall, winter, and into spring, those houses never showed another sign of life. No cars, no lights, no movement, no old woman in the yard. Every time I passed, I felt the same tension building in my chest, waiting to see her again, but she never appeared. It almost made that one afternoon worse. It left me with this cold thought lodged in my mind. If she did live there, why was she only there once, for just that one moment? And if she didn't live there, then what was she doing out there, pushing a mower in a yard that wasn't kept, in front of a house that wasn't livable, in the middle of nowhere? It sounds simple when I tell it. Just an old lady on her lawn. Nothing threatening, nothing dramatic. But there was something in the way she looked at me, something unnatural in her stillness, in the fact that she turned her whole body just to keep her eyes on me as I passed. I don't scare easy, but I'll be honest, I dreaded that stretch every month after. And when my job changed and I stopped running that route altogether, I felt relief I didn't even realize I'd been carrying. I never went back down that road after. Never checked those houses again. I don't even know if they're still standing, or if they've been bulldozed into the ground. Maybe they're gone. Maybe she is too. But sometimes I wonder about her, about the way she dropped that mower and turned like she had been waiting for me all along. And I think about the silence of that long road, how I never saw another car that whole afternoon until I reached the other town. It makes me wonder what else I didn't see out there, in the stretches of road that were too quiet, where my headlights never reached and my eyes didn't linger. I had been driving most of the night, the kind of long haul where the hours smear together until you don't really feel like a person anymore, just part of the truck. The hum of the tires on asphalt and the faint vibration through the wheel had become background noise, like the sound of your own heartbeat. By the time I reached that exit ramp, my body wasn't even tired in the normal sense. It was more like numb. You know you need rest, but your brain keeps replaying the miles you just covered, and your muscles stay locked into the rhythm of holding steady in your lane. It was around 3 in the morning, maybe a few minutes past. I remember checking the time when I eased off onto the ramp, not because I cared what the numbers said, but because I was calculating my hours. I needed my 10, and I figured a quiet exit ramp would do just fine. I'd done it plenty of times before, never my favorite option, but better than pushing too far or gambling on a sketchy lot. The night itself was almost unnaturally clear. The moon was high, full, bright enough that it painted everything silver. You don't get that kind of brightness often, especially in the middle of nowhere, where the nearest town lights don't dull it down. It gave the whole landscape this eerie sharpness, like a black and white photo, where every shadow looked darker than it should. The ramp curved off into a stretch of cut cornfield, flat as a table. The stalks had been taken down weeks ago, leaving only short, ragged stubs sticking up, the ground looking raw and chewed. I parked near the end of the ramp, far enough off that any passing cars wouldn't bother me. Once I set the brakes and the hiss of air settled, the silence came down heavy like a blanket. Out there, even the faint sounds, wind nudging the trees, the hum of power lines, feel louder than they really are. That was when I saw it. At first, I wasn't even sure what I was looking at. Just this shape in the field. A figure. The way the moonlight hit it, there was no mistaking the outline. It was human. Upright. Still. facing toward the road. For a few seconds, I just sat there in my seat, hand resting on the ignition key like maybe I'd pull back out and keep moving. But then I caught myself. People do weird things. Maybe some old guy set up a scarecrow to keep the deer off. Maybe it was a hunting decoy. My brain wanted an explanation and landed on the scarecrow idea. It was spooky, sure, but not impossible. Out here, people rig all sorts of strange things in their fields. I shook it off, told myself not to overthink. Inside the cab, I dug out my phone, scrolled through YouTube, and started letting some videos play. Just noise, something to fill the emptiness outside. The glow of the screen was a comfort in a way, but every so often, my eyes flicked off to the side window. You don't mean to do it, but your instincts make you check. And each time, I'd see the same thing, just that figure, motionless in the field. Then came the moment that really sank into me. Out of the corner of my vision, I thought I saw movement. A flicker. My head jerked, my eyes locking onto that spot. I shut off my lights to make sure I wasn't just catching a reflection. The world outside went dim except for the moonlight, which made the shadows stretch even longer. There it was again, the figure. But now I wasn't sure it was in the same place. It looked different. Maybe 10, 20 feet closer? My gut told me it wasn't just my imagination. My eyes aren't perfect in the dark, but I drive enough nights to know when something doesn't feel right. I tried to reason with myself. I told myself the angle must have changed, or I was looking from a different spot in the cab. The brain plays tricks when you stare at something too long. Still, I couldn't shake the tightening in my stomach, the sense that it wasn't as far away as before. I sat there for a while, debating whether to just crawl into the sleeper and shut the curtains or keep watching. Eventually, nature made the decision for me. I had to pee. At first, I thought about grabbing a bottle. Hell, I had a couple empties rolling around by the passenger seat. It would have been easy, but I argued with myself. I told myself I was being childish, that I was letting some shadow in a cornfield dictate my actions. I was a grown man, sitting in a truck with the doors locked. Nothing was going to happen. I checked the figure one more time. It was right where I thought it should be. Still as stone. I grabbed my flashlight, though I didn't turn it on, and popped the door. The cool night air hit me, a sharp contrast after the stale warmth of the cab. Gravel crunched under my boots as I stepped down. The field spread out quiet and open, the figure still upright in the moonlight. I walked between the truck and trailer, the narrow space closing me in. The air smelled faintly of diesel and dust. I unzipped and started relieving myself, trying to focus on the sound of liquid hitting the ground instead of the prickling on the back of my neck. Every fiber of my being wanted to turn, to check the field again. I told myself not to, that I was being foolish. But I couldn't help it. I looked. The field was empty. No figure. No shape. Just the cut corn stubs stretching into the silver horizon. My stomach dropped like a stone. A rush of cold ran up my spine, tightening every muscle. I tried to pinch it off midstream, zipped up in a hurry, and practically stumbled as I bolted back toward the cab. My heart was slamming hard enough I could hear it in my ears. I climbed in fast, slammed the door shut, and hit the locks like it was second nature. I didn't think. I just turned the key, threw it into gear, and pulled out. Violation or no violation, I wasn't about to stick around. My logbook could go to hell. I got back on the highway, the trailer groaning behind me as I accelerated hard enough to make the engine whine. The road stretched out empty, only the occasional headlights passing in the opposite lane every 10 minutes or so. My hands gripped the wheel so tight the knuckles burned white. I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see something. Someone, running along the shoulder, keeping pace. After 40 minutes, I saw the bright glow of a Love's truck stop. Floodlights lit up the whole lot, the neon sign standing tall like a beacon. The sight of other trucks parked in neat rows was the most comforting thing I'd seen all night. I pulled in, found a spot near the middle where the light was brightest, and shut down. I sat there for a long time, before I even thought about crawling into the sleeper. My body buzzed with leftover adrenaline, my throat dry, my chest tight. I replayed the whole thing over and over in my head, searching for an explanation. Maybe it really was a scarecrow, and my eyes tricked me. Maybe someone was out there moving it as some kind of prank. But deep down, I knew what I saw, or what I didn't see when I finally turned. That figure had been there, plain as day, and then it wasn't. And nothing in me believes it just fell over or vanished by chance. That night stuck with me. It made me change my habits. I haven't parked on an exit ramp since, no matter how tired I am, no matter how much it screws with my hours. I'd rather push a little further, pay for a spot, or even circle until I find one. Anything but sitting alone in the dark with fields stretching out on either side. Because once you've had that moment, that instant when something you thought was harmless suddenly isn't, there's no going back. You can tell yourself all the stories you want, but your gut remembers the fear. Mine sure as hell does. And every time I pass a cornfield at night, lit up silver under a full moon, I can't help but check the edges. Just in case.